What were the town planners thinking? Ah yes, socialism was on their brains. That is Southampton through and through. A tourist is supposed to navigate through this modernist wasteland. This used to be a pub in an old Tudor building, maybe. I'm in noisy London. It's time to day trip away out of this noisy, ghastly city. I'm off to Southampton of all places. I'm going to take the train from Waterloo and spend a few hours in Southampton. So I thought maybe you could join me. Today's adventure is Southampton, a city once known as the gateway to the world, a city that has seen the best of times and the worst of times. A city, like so many in Britain, has been let down by those who were meant to safeguard its future. But Southampton is still standing, and today I'm here to see it for myself. Beautiful Southampton, we've arrived, and thank God it's sunny. I wasn't sure if it was going to be rainy. As you can see, we've got grey clouds over here, or we're going to have sunshine. Let's see how the day unfolds.
Whatever else this place needs, I'm here for it.
A beautiful modernist entrance point. We have a pure gym over here. Let's continue. Let's head into town and see what we see in historic Southampton. And I'm going to tell you a bit about the history along the way.
I like history too, and maybe when this is all over, you and I can stop by the souvenir shop together.
One thing that never ceases to amaze me about British cities that have been blighted by the Luftwaffe. They never have the most welcoming of train stations. The train station being over here, we have this sort of eyesore here, we have electricity plants over here. You can hear the buzz in the background of the electricity. Beautiful graffiti. You can give Banksy a run for his money. A tourist is supposed to navigate through this modernist wasteland and try to find their way to the sights of Southampton. And it's a real bloody shame, to be honest, because this is a historic city. It's been in existence for over 2,000 years in some form or another. It was a Stone Age settlement, it was an Iron Age settlement, it was a Bronze Age settlement. When the Romans found it in the 1st century, they called it Claus Centrum. Clau meaning closed is in the Latin for claw, because claw engulfing the area, a closed settlement.
But his most popular name is the Claw.
But before the Romans, there was a tribe called the Belgae, and they were the Belgae from what we know as modern day Belgium, northern France. They effectively were the Gauls. And if you're fans of Asterix and Obelix, you'll know the Gauls were the warrior tribe that gave the Romans a good fight. Until Julius Caesar, between 50 and 60 BC, between 60 BC and 50 BC, did he finally defeat the Gauls.
Terrific race, the Romans.
Let's cross the road. We might start to get a bit of a monument going on. We've got this beautiful fountain. Is that a fountain, do you think? I think it might be a fountain that isn't on. So going back to the Gauls, eventually Julius Caesar defeated them around about 50 BC, forcing many of them to basically leave. They didn't want to live under the oppression of the Romans, the Roman Empire, brutal force, a magnificent empire, but at the same time, if you were being occupied by them and you didn't fancy obeying their rules and what warrior would want to obey their rules, you would want to leave. Look at this beautiful place. I think we've ended up in the wrong part of town. We're now on the retail estate where the furniture village is. So the Gauls would have left modern day Belgium, northern France, and they would have headed across probably from where Calais is today, and they would have found their way into this part of the world. And obviously Southampton, which at the time was called something completely different. You could say Claus Centrum, the Roman, the Latin. They would have settled here and hoped to have gotten away from the Romans, but it would have been almost 100 years later that the Romans would have finally turned up, so their great-grandchildren probably experienced the fright of the Romans coming here. Around about 50 AD, the Romans would have got here.
Bloody Romans can't take a joke!
So right, we're back again. Time for us to take this. A Roman settlement was set up. And then, because of its sheltered place being a port, the settlement grew and grew and grew. And it was a good base for the Romans to expand across the British Isles, going all the way up into Wales, the Midlands, East Anglia, and then heading on to northern England until they got to Scotland, where they thought that we've had enough of this bad weather, and who are these savages up here? They thought that's as far as we're going. They never made it to Ireland, just as well really, but we find ourselves here in modernist Southampton, and this is Westquay Shopping Centre. Now, I've never been here before. Last time I was in Southampton, I was 4 years old, so that's a long time ago. Westquay apparently was built in the 1990s. Modernism at its finest.
I haven't seen them since Southampton.
I just looked at the map just to get myself back on track to see where we're going, and we are kind of going in the right direction. Possibly not visually beautiful direction, but I'm going to head down into the port area, which is a significant part of the world because it's actually where, for my American viewers, historically contextual, relevant to you guys, in the fact that the port down here is where the Mayflower set sail before it went to Plymouth.
In 1620, the Mayflower set sail from England, looking for freedom in the New World.
Because originally it was built in Harwich. Harwich is obviously East Anglia. The pilgrims came mostly from the Midlands, from the north of England, persecuted. They fled to Belgium, so there's another connection to the Belgians again. And then they came back to England, where they would then board the Mayflower in Southampton. Then they would set sail from Southampton to Plymouth, which is on the west coast of England, where the ship would undergo a little bit of repair for the long voyage across the Atlantic, where eventually they would land in present-day North America, present-day USA, and they would be the first people to really set up a colony in the USA, present-day USA. 102 of them set sail from here, Southampton, and as we get to the wind, I get my first taste or sniff of the sea air over here when we get to the coast. So this, none of the original pilgrims would have seen. Back in the day, it would have been nice wooden huts, it would have been beautiful little houses, dirt streets, horses going by. Today, the affliction that you could be anywhere. Are we in Singapore or are we in Southampton?
Many thanks for joining me today. Just note this video does have chapters, so if you want to skip ahead, please feel free to pick a chapter, but it's best watched in a linear structure to really grasp this city.
So as we walk away from the shopping centre and we walk closer towards the port, I'm hoping that in this direction is where we're going to see the monument that sort of makes us remember, allows us to remember those pioneers, those people you should be eternally, well, forever grateful to if you've got any North American heritage or American heritage, because without those original pilgrims setting up a colony in the present day USA, the USA wouldn't have become the mighty powerhouse that it is today. So it's those innovators, it's those Englishmen who set sail to an unknown land to basically find a new life, stake a claim in the new world and set up a new civilization away from this ghastly civilization over here that is the modern day bleakness. Well, this is sadly a little bit reminiscent of many US cities. They've got a fondness for car parks around here.
As we turn away from this 1960s glass and steel Leonardo Hotel, we suddenly step into the Southampton's past. This is the West Gate, once a threshold between England and the world. Through this very arch, Henry V's army marched in 1415, bound Agincourt. Over 200 years later, in 1620, the Mayflower pilgrims passed beneath it, taking their final steps on English soil before sailing into the unknown.
We're just going to take a slight detour because I don't want us to get to the Mayflower point before we've really gone over the history of how the pilgrims got there first, because I think there's far more to Southampton than simply the Mayflower, the Titanic, for example. There is the Titanic setting sail from here and many, many cruise ships setting sail from here, because at the end of the day, once the Belgae had formed this settlement, and then the Romans came almost 100 years later, basically chasing their ancestors, and then settled it as Claus Centlum. It was then known as that for probably 400 to 500 years before the Romans eventually left Britain. And when the Romans left Britain, obviously the Saxons then took it up as a place to call home. The Saxons obviously changed the name from Claus Centrum to Huntwich or Humpton. Why did it change the name? Well, they spoke effectively a different language. It wasn't the Latin that the Romans would be speaking. They changed the name. And then for many, many years it was called Humpton. But you might I've then noticed on the map, or as you headed up towards the Midlands, there was another place called Humpton, which is now Northampton. So effectively, Humpton in the north, or the Midlands, became Northampton, and in the south, which is where we are today, became Southampton. That's how we effectively got to the name. By 1066, we had the Norman invasion, and they expanded the settlement because it was a good place for the ships to dock and for them to expand their empire. And by 1086, Southampton was in the Domesday Book. You'll notice as we walk along here, we start to see the city walls. We have the West Gate back there, and these city walls were then put up in the 14th century, basically to keep out the French. The French were a hugely risky and imposing threat to the people of Britain.
I'm French! Why do you think I have this outrageous accent, you silly king?
By the 14th century, so you had to guard your cities wisely with forts and walls, so effectively to stop the invaders coming in and causing havoc. We had these big walls, and as you can see, it would have been very difficult to navigate through the city, but imposing walls, and I'm glad that this still remains. It's just a shame they have to be side by side to modern day eyesores like this shopping centre over here. Fun if you're a shopaholic, less fun if you're a keen historian, because I think it doesn't really mesh well with this beautiful wall, city walls. But what we will find, most of the interesting stuff will be on the other side of the city walls. So we're going to go on the other side of the city walls, head up to the corner over here. We're going to head to the corner over here, and then we will come back down. And as we come back down towards the port, that's when we'll find where the Mayflower set off.
As I walked beside the walls, I admired the hard-working men preserving the past brick by brick. But what did these walls see? What did they witness in our great past? These walls stood strong, watching over a city that once knew its place in the world. And now these walls stare across at a modern shopping centre, a monument not to Southampton's strength, but to its forgetfulness. Overpaid architects have designed this glass and steel behemoth so that consumerism could flourish, so people could forget who they are. The past is paved over and walls ignored, while another H&M opens its doors, and another generation of young people walks by, unaware of the history beneath their feet. But these walls remain, and for those who care to look, they tell a different story, a story of resilience, a reminder that Southampton was once a city of purpose, not just another place to spend money.
As you can see, there's preservation work going on. Men here are preserving the wall. It's a good thing to see in a way. The only way we can preserve these things is we restore the cement in between. Sadly, not the cement that was used over 600 years ago. It's now modern day cement, but I'm glad that they are keeping the restoration of these walls up, because this needs to be preserved. You know, hopefully this will still be here in another 600 years, whereas I'm pretty sure this will be gone within the next 100 years, is my guess.
Remember, if you're enjoying this video, leave a comment below, and if you're feeling compelled, click that like button. And if you haven't already done so, click the subscribe button, because it allows this channel to grow and to continue making more videos just like this and many of the others you may have seen already on my channel.
So you remember I said that on the other side of the city walls it would probably be historic and beautiful. I couldn't be more wrong. There's construction work going on, and then there's this. Southampton, what have you become? What have you become?
Now, Southampton's a city that wears its history on its sleeve, from medieval walls to scars of war. But what happened after the war? Why did British cities rebuilt from rubble so often end up looking soulless? Like many places in the UK, Southampton's post-war planning lacked vision. Councillors, often ideologically driven, cared more for function than form, and the result, a patchwork of uninspired architecture, a city centre that perhaps lacks warmth, and a creeping sense that something has been lost.
I'm going to try my best to find points of interest, but when you're presented with streets like this, it's going to be a hard job. But I have found, just over here down this alleyway, a pub. And don't worry, I'm not going to go in and have a drink straight away. Called the Titanic. Obviously, Titanic set sail from Southampton. You might remember from a very famous movie.
All right, moment of truth. Somebody's life's about to change.
A homeless man, won a ticket to the Titanic.
Because we're going to America. Full house, boys! No!
Got on board and then basically fell in love with a Kate Winslet type bird. And on her deathbed, in her old age, she didn't remember her family. She didn't want to remember her grandchildren or her children. She wanted to remember the homeless man that she allowed to slip into the water, into a very cold death. But the Titanic pubs, obviously memories that the Titanic set sail on that fateful day, never to be seen again. But why not? Let's name a pub after it. Maybe one day there will be pubs named after Malaysian Airlines flight, you name it. It's always interesting to look at the names of what pubs used to be. I think it's quite clear that this didn't always used to be called the Titanic, it used to be called the Queen. It's a shame that it didn't keep its name, but you can see for tourist reasons, it's a good name change. But it used to be called the Queen, and now it is the Titanic. But thank God, finally we start to see some buildings of the past. So in front of us we got some modernism, but in the past we have some Tudor type houses. During Henry VIII's time, Southampton became quite a prolific place in terms of wealthy, place of lots of trade, whereas a lot of building took place and a lot of prosperity took place. And thank God, here we go. We're starting to see some beauty behind us. First signs of beauty. And this is called St. Michael's Square. There we go. I'm just going to pan around. Let's change this.
This small, unassuming patch of land tells a deeper story about the rise, resilience and ruin of Southampton. The square itself sits at the heart of the old town, once the beating heart of a medieval trading port. Imagine, you will, the space in the 12th and the 13th centuries, a bustling hub of merchants, shipbuilders and foreign traders unloading goods from across the known world. Wool, wine, spices. This was a city of wealth, a city with purpose. Now it's quiet, the past whispers, but few stop to listen. But standing proud in the square is something remarkable. St. Michael's Church. It's been here since 1070, built by the Normans, a rare survivor in the city that has lost so much. Southampton was flattened in the Blitz. Its medieval core turned into rubble, yet this church still stands, a defiant piece of old England, refusing to be erased. Inside, hidden treasures remain, a font carved from a single block of limestone, over 1,000 years old, and stained glass that survived the worst of war and time. This church, this square, is a reminder of what Southampton once was, a city with a soul, a city that knew its identity and wasn't ashamed of it. But now the square faces the same fate as the rest of Southampton, overlooked, ignored, left behind. Yet for those willing to stop and look at St. Michael's Church still stands, still watches, still remembers. The question is, will the people of Southampton remember too? So we started here in the banqueting hall. Oh, better be quiet.
Are you visitors?
Yes. Oh, how exciting. What fun.
Call the other spirits. Come quickly, everyone. We have visitors.
Visitors?
Visitors. Visitors. Visitors.
In the banqueting hall?
We must tell the time waver.
Yes, tell the time weaver.
Tell the time weaver.
Tell the time weaver. Master, we have visitors.
Visitors? So we do.
What fun.
Hush now, spirits. I know you're excited to see them, but please settle down. We have so much to tell. So much to tell.
Yes, so much to
Yes,
tell.
we all do, but only in good time. First, we must welcome our visitors. Honored guests, welcome to... Oh, what now? Come in, come in. So very late, Master. Quiet, spirit. I shall speak to you later.
Well, we've just come out of the Ghosts. It was a nice 10-minute commentary of the Tudor House and how it's evolved over the years and the changing area. And to be honest, I'm glad I've done this early on in the tour of Southampton because it gave a little extra insight into the fact that Southampton has always had problems, not just today. It had problems in the past, the slums to the Westgate, where we originally came in by the car park. The pendulum has swung from the good times to the bad times, and I think we need to put that in perspective.
Ghosts, echoes of the past, stories of those who came before lingering in the air, but you don't need a recorded voice in a darkened room to hear them. Walk these halls, run your hands along these ancient timbers, step into this house and you can feel them. This, as I stated, is Tudor House, one of the most important buildings in Southampton. Yet, how many people outside this city even know it exists? This place has stood for over 800 years, witnessing war, trade, disaster, and renewal. Originally it was built in the 15th century. Tudor House belonged to Sir John Daughtry, a wealth merchant and an official to King Henry VII. Imagine the lavish feasts held in these very rooms, roaring fires and the scent of roasted meats, goblets of spiced wine passed between noble guests. This was not just any home, this was a declaration of power, wealth and influence. But like so much of Britain, glory fades. Over the centuries, Tudor House changed hands, merchants came and went, fortunes were lost, and by the 19th century, this grand residence had fallen into disrepair. What was once a house of prestige had become a Victorian slum, its once proud walls now home to poverty, overcrowding and despair. Yet somehow it survived, unlike much of Southampton which was obliterated in the Blitz. Tudor House endured, it saved, it restored, and in 1912 turned into a museum, allowing future generations to step back into the past. And while much has changed outside these walls, inside history still remains. Beyond the house lies a hidden treasure, a medieval-style garden, a tranquil pocket of history in the heart of a city that has forgotten itself. Herbs, fruit trees and flowers bloom as they would have centuries ago, offering a glimpse into a world where beauty and function coexisted. The people who built Tudor House understood legacy, they built it to last. Today's architects, they build for profit, yet Tudor House still stands, a survivor, a relic, a reminder. The question is, will we let places like this fade into the past, or will we fight to preserve the little history we have left? Obviously the English have always loved their English country gardens. This is a Tudor garden, very similar to gardens we see nowadays in England, but immaculately taken care of and very, very beautiful. Regal sort of, look at this, we've got the court over here. This is King John's Palace. Overlooking the ruins is the fine stone house called King John's Palace, one of the best examples of a Norman architecture in the country. It was owned by John Widgott, a rich merchant, not a king, in the 1300s. It later became part of the town's defensive wall. Today it's sometimes used for events. By the 1180s, when the house was built, Southampton was already an important port. The house was a quayside where ships loaded and unloaded their cargoes. After the raid of the French in 1338, the town's sea defences were strengthened, which is the wall that we saw earlier, and the door and the windows in the front of the house were blocked with stone, and it became part of the town's defensive wall. In the 1700s it was used as a coach house and stables. In the 1800s it was a coal merchant's business, and by the 1900s Mr. Spranger's private museum, now in it just a shell. Give you some perspective, we are now at the roundabout where we came in, where I thought, no, let's duck over this direction so we can take in the city walls. And here we are, actually at the city walls, to give you perspective on how tall they are. And we've got the cannon that was presented by Henry VIII to the city of Southampton. And over here we got our first glimpse of effectively the sea, the port, out in that direction, just past the roundabout over there. But as you can see down there, the boats, this is a cargo ship. This was based on Viking longboats. The Vikings had a real impact on this area. So when the Romans left and the Viking raid started, for a couple of hundred years, when it was called Hampton, was really decimated by the Vikings. They would raid, take women, steal things, take in any treasures, and then leave again. And they would continue to do that again and again, to the point where people had to flee inland just to get away from the Vikings. But they left an impact in the fact that the cargo boats here are based on the original Viking longboats. So it gives you some perspective on how much the Vikings have impacted the British history, the British way of life, to the point where they were the pesky neighbours that caused us much heartache and terror. But you know, fair play to them. fascinating in a way. It basically shows the evolving stages of the house, how it changed depending on each owner, how they used the size of a ship for some of the floorboards, how the Tudor kitchen changed to the Victorian kitchen. There's some really interesting things in here, and I'm glad that I think it's worthy of anyone's time, especially if you're into a historic history. So far so good, I'm enjoying this.
Don't film me.
Oh yeah. This is one of the things that you'll notice about Tudor houses are the beams. Some of the beams are sometimes decorative. You'll see beams on the side of walls that are decorative, but these are actually beams that are holding up the roof, giving support to the place. Old beam, new beam here, just to basically hold up the place, because it is a very old building. But it was pleasing to see that it's being preserved, even though I don't see how this is relevant, but it's just we need to tell people these days, because it's amazing how people seem unable to take their lids home with them. But I don't think the people that need to be told are actually visiting this museum, but who knows. This is one thing you always see in these sort of gift shops, is have the ability to buy mead. Now, mead is the alcohol that we used to drink back in the day, made out of honey, and 1 or 2 sips is okay, but anything more it gets a little bit sickly. Well, a nice museum. £7.50 if you're an adult, or £7 if you're a student. You can save yourself 50p being a student. It gives you a bit of insight into the rich history of Southampton before all this atrocious modernism creeped in. And weren't the Tudors amazing builders? Why can't we make beautiful things like this nowadays? Instead, we have to sort of settle for less. But an interesting museum nonetheless. I enjoyed it, and it gives incredible insight into Southampton's rich history from the fates of the Tudors onwards. I'm sure we've got more beautiful things to see. I just bought myself a postcard in the museum, so those who are members of the Postcard Club, one of you might be receiving a postcard from this museum. Every time I go to a little place, I buy one postcard, and who knows who's going to get this postcard. But if you want to join as a member, you can join the Postcard Club.
Oh, Mr. Hopwell, there's postcard for you, sir. Hi.
Just don't know.
Well, I must say, this is the first beautiful pub I've seen so far, and this is a magnificent example of a Tudor building. Look at the beams showing the Duke of Wellington. So obviously it didn't always have this name, but it was named after one of the greats, and beautiful pub. I think if we had more time, we could stop off there, have a good pint, but I think it's the fact that, let's have a look at this plaque on the wall, see what it says on Vice Lane. The 12th century stone house on this site, the foundations and cellars which still remain, was from 1220, owned by Benedict Ace, one of the earliest named mayors of Southampton, from 1237 to 1245. The house was damaged in the French raid of 1338. 1490 was incorporated into the present building by a brewer, Roland Johnson, and named the Beer House. See, it wasn't always their Wellington. It has remained an inn ever since, but its name was changed to the Duke of Wellington soon after the Battle of Waterloo. It was damaged by the enemy action during the 1939-45 war and restored between 62 and 63. What a magnificent building. Bit of history, but why build this behind it, and why build this? What were you thinking? Standing here, it's hard not to feel a sense of disconnect. The Mayflower Memorial to our left, tall but weathered, stands on the edge of a busy road, a monument that has certainly seen better days. This spot marks the departure of one of the most significant voyages in history. In 1620, 102 men, women, and children gathered here, preparing to board the Mayflower. Pilgrims, religious dissenters, dissidents, and adventurers, people risking everything for a new life across the Atlantic. Southampton was their final stop before the unknown. They took on supplies, whispered last goodbyes, and stepped onto the ships that would carry them into history. Not just for themselves, but for the future of an entire nation. Their journey wasn't easy. The Speedwell, which was the second ship, leaked, forcing them to turn back. leaving only the Mayflower to continue, battling storms, sickness and uncertainty until they finally reached America, where their struggle for survival and self-governance laid the foundation for a country that would shape the modern world.
So right next to Cuckoo Lane, a little bit of cuckoo thinking by the town planners, and the fact that the monument that celebrates and remembers those pioneers that set off on the Mayflower, put it next to this 6 lanes of traffic, and this is how you want to commemorate pioneers of the Mayflower. When they set off, we can see the names of these people. Wow. It celebrates Edward Wilson, the 3rd governor of the Plymouth colony, born 1595, died 1655.
The monument itself is an obelisk, a structure long associated with memory, power and symbolism, and as regular viewers to this channel will know, obelisks frequently appear in my videos. To London's Cleopatra's Needle, to Napoleon's towering tributes to himself, and now here in Southampton, marking a kind of different journey. Obelisks have stood for thousands of years from ancient Egypt to the great cities of Europe and America, often marking significant moments in history, but undoubtedly they have the connections to the Freemasons. The Freemasons will tell you the obelisk is a symbol of wisdom, enlightenment and a journey towards higher knowledge. Perhaps there's more to the connection than just symbolism. Many descendants of the Mayflower passengers went on to become Freemasons themselves. Among them was Arthur Wallace Steer, a direct descendant to George Sewell. One of the original pilgrims, Steer, like many others, was an active Freemason, suggesting that the pioneering spirit of the Mayflower didn't just shape America, but it also found its way into the secretive brotherhoods of later generations. Of course the choice of an obelisk here was intentional. Of course it's a quiet nod to the Freemasons who installed it here, marking themselves that they were the pioneers. But either way, regardless of intent, the Mayflower Memorial remains a striking landmark, a link between the old world and the new. Just a shame it's on such a busy road, because this is where history turned, where ordinary people set out to shape an extraordinary future.
It is strange to think that many people would never have seen Europe ever again, let alone Britain ever again. This noisy bit of land that we stand on where there's 6 lanes of traffic would have been the last they would have seen before disembarking on their voyages. Now the Mayflower being obviously the most famous of the two, but at the same time, the one we always forget those that came second. 2 ships, the Speedwell also set sail from here. So they would have disembarked, the pioneers would have headed to the Americas. But Southampton's also a place where other people would have disembarked. The Titanic obviously disembarked from here, which we're going to see over here. You'll notice all the cruise ships in this direction. That's where the Titanic would have been. And also, it would have been, it's a place for people to go on cruises. So if you're setting off on a cruise from the UK, Southampton is often the place where you would set sail from. But it's also a place that has seen many, many arrivals. People arriving from the Caribbean in the 1950s who were sold tickets by the ships, who insisted on basically bringing a cargo back. They took cargo to the Caribbean and they basically needed to fill their ships up on the way back. So the way they could do that was to sell tickets for the returning leg. And they sold those tickets to residents of the Caribbean. So many people came over, and that is what is known today as the Windrush generation. But the migration still continues, and Southampton is a port for many people.
I couldn't resist when I saw this place. This is called the Dancing Man Brewery. I only got to sample 1 pint. I felt obliged to you guys to make as much content as possible for this video. Everyone needs to stop once in a while, and this looked like a pretty good place to stop. I went for the old-fashioned best bitter.
I've just gone into the Dancing Man Brewery to get myself a good pint of bitter. We need a little bit of energy as we continue our tour around Southampton. It is a shame that right next to the port is 6 lanes of traffic. I know I've stated it before, but I think it kind of sums up what I'm getting a feeling about this city. It just seems like poor planning by people that lack foresight into what resonates with the population. The Germans had their cities destroyed during the Second World War, similar to us, similar to what's happened in Southampton, but unlike the Germans, we have decided not to go down the route of
rebuilding and making things aesthetically better. We've gone down the let's just mishmash and put on car parks and IKEA places and shopping centres all over the place, not thinking about the future and not thinking about how that motivates the people. And they wonder why Southampton has an increasing crime rate when they don't see beauty around them. They see decay. It doesn't help the surroundings. But anyway, I'm just going to stop the rant because this is worth checking out. It's worth enjoying a good pint of bitter from a cask. So just cross the street to get closer to the sea, and we find this beautiful Victorian building built in 1833. And in a way it's quite reflective of what has happened to Great Britain. Now it is a Indian restaurant. It just kind of shows how the UK has changed dramatically. I'm sure it's a great restaurant. I love Indian food, but I don't think a Victorian building like that should be turned into something like that. But what my understanding is, this closed in 1979. It needed to be preserved somehow, and in a way, as long as they take care of it, it's a good thing. Note the lions on the top of the building. The front, yeah, at the top there's a pineapple. Pineapples were sort of introduced once people discovered the New World, and they found that pineapples were a symbol of prosperity. So pineapples were put on all buildings. So you'd expect a building built in 1833 to have pineapples. But as we approach the blustery wind, we get our first view of the water over here, and we get an understanding that this is, or it used to be, a fairly significant port. And just think, the Mayflower memorabilia is just in front of us here, so they would have set sail here, taking it, going, saying goodbye England, making their way onwards to the New World. But look at this, let's have a look. Trying to zigzag across this town just to sort of take it in, but as you can see, we have modern buildings here, but then we have this very, very old building just here. Now you've got to realise, during the Second World War, the Luftwaffe would have seen Southampton as a huge target. It's a port. It was a place that Lord Mountbatten launched the D-Day landings from, and without the D-Day landings, the Allies wouldn't have secured victories. So many American soldiers, Canadians, Australians, Brits, the last place they saw before they hit the Normandy coasts was the port of Southampton. They came from this port, and a lot of them were stationed around this area before they set sail on possibly in the last few days of their lives. You can see this ancient house, and this is one of the few buildings that wouldn't have been bombed, survived thankfully. So then they had to rebuild in the 1960s. This is classic architecture that you find all over England. Still standing. In mid-60s this was built. Some of it would have been social housing, but much of it now is private accommodation. And then here we have buildings that have been built in the last 20 years. It's been built. And then over here, God knows what this is. Have a look at this eyesore. It used to be something. BT score probably tells me that this possibly was a club, probably a place that people would meet. There's a montage to Freddie Mercury. Some football connections. But this is literally right in the heart of Southampton, and other than this beautiful church, St Michael's Church, which we went in earlier, see how we're going up and down the streets just to try and find something of interest. It makes you wonder, who is running the council? Who is the mayor? Who is the MP of this area? They're doing a terrible job, absolutely terrible. And then you start realising why I have this fondness for Eastern Europe, and I see how they at least value their heritage and they value their past. But we're going to continue this way, past St Michael's Church, and continue up this way. We find ourselves now on the high street of Southampton, so effectively the centre of Southampton. We've got the city walls right behind us. Behind me is a pub called the Standing Order. Popular, a lot of Southampton football fans here. There's a game on today. As we walk the streets of Southampton, for your eyes only at strip club. The Dolphin Hotel to our left over here. And then there's an anchor showing the significant maritime past
and present of Southampton. But what's more interesting, I think, is this church. We're going to go check out this church over here.
In most cities, when a church is destroyed, it disappears, erased, maybe it gets rebuilt over, or forgotten. But the Holyrood Church stands defiantly in its ruin, a monument to both faith and destruction. It was built in the 14th century. Holyrood was once one of Southampton's grandest churches, serving the people of the town for over 600 years. Its towering Gothic arches, intricate stained glass windows, and imposing bell tower dominated the medieval skyline, a landmark for weary sailors returning home. They could see it from the sea. Now inside it was a space of ornate woodwork, stone carvings, and a soft flicker of candlelight illuminating its high vaulted ceilings. The church was a place of refuge for seafarers, where men embarking on perilous voyages would kneel before the altar, praying for safe passage. Merchants and traders who had built their fortunes on the sea funded its expansion, adding chapels, memorials, and treasures that reflected Southampton's importance as a maritime city. But in November 1940, the Blitz changed everything. German bombs rained down on Southampton, and Holyrood was directly hit. The flames consumed the ancient wooden beams, and the stained glass shattered, and the roof collapsed into the nave. In just one night, centuries of history were reduced to rubble. And then the decision was made not to rebuild, not to restore, but to leave it as it was, a silent ruin, a scar left open as a memorial to those lost at sea. There's something powerful about that, a rawness that speaks to the destruction Southampton endured. But I can't help but wonder, should they have rebuilt it? Other cities rose from rubble. Just look at all the cities in Poland. Their churches were restored, their histories reclaimed. Here, the ruin remains. A place where stone and sky meet, where the past lingers but never truly comes back to life.
Nathan Bowen. This guy follows us everywhere. Everywhere we go in London, everywhere, every city around the United Kingdom. This artist, Nathan Bowen, is to be seen. I like his message. It says stay positive, but when you've got on the main high street what used to be a contemporary Japanese bar and kitchen is now basically boarded up, and we have, I don't know, it's just a shame. We have the church that was never rebuilt. The centre of Holyrood Church could have been rebuilt, but it was bombed in 1940, and they thought, well, why should we rebuild it? Well, plenty of reasons why you should rebuild it. They've left it as it is, and I think it kind of sums up much of this city with the boarded up shops. Probably much of this was impacted during the days of COVID. We had a reasonably okay economy until then, and then all over the UK, shops were boarded up and businesses basically went under. Unless they were incredibly wealthy, they went under. But as you can see, there's still problems over here. It's a shame. It's a real shame.
I'd love to be just another positive travel vlogger, telling you everything is wonderful everywhere I go, but I can't do that. I have to be real about the places I visit, the decline, the soulless developments, the erosion of history.
So just back there we saw the bomb damage, or the decimation that this town suffered during the Luftwaffe blitz of this city. So many buildings completely destroyed, including obviously the church back there. It's just a sad thing. When brothers go against brothers, caused by the banksters, it doesn't end well. Are we going back into that world again?
It's not the fault of the cities themselves, but of corrupt governments that have led us down this path decades and decades. Travel should be about discovery, not denial. And if we don't talk about what's happening, how can we ever hope to fix it?
So just at the bottom of the high street before we get back to the sea, we find this Canut's Palace. No significance to King Canute. He effectively never resided here. His palace certainly was not here. He was celebrated in the region when the Normans arrived. This was then put up, I think, in 1170, and it would have been used as storage places. Maybe there would have been a watchtower for the Normans. The Normans had their towers dotted all over the British Isles. See this? See the stone masonry here? Still quite impressive though. It's nice to see this in the middle. Strange that we've got a silly little maze in the thing. Kind of shows the standard. We got a trolley, not any old kind of trolley, a trolley for airports, or probably the port, just planted here. Why not? Why not indeed? The slight unfair thing about Southampton is majorly used as a through route in the fact that this is a place that you would basically board a ferry if you wanted to go to the Isle of Wight. You notice here, departures to the Isle of Wight. 2 leaving at 3 o'clock, another one at 4, 10 past 4. Many, so basically 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 departures between now and 7:40. All to the Isle of Wight, and the Isle of Wight is not that far from Southampton. This is where it's at a disadvantage. You know, people travel down the country and they go, I'm going to go visit the Isle of Wight, and they just park up. They don't really take in that is, well, I don't blame them from what I'm seeing so far. But we're going to find something. As we're going to walk along the pier, maybe we'll find some beauty. Who knows? But this is a pier, and we're going to see if we can get a good view. Probably will struggle to hear me, but this is obviously the port of Southampton, and as you can see with the P&O ferry behind me over here, this is effectively where the Titanic would have been in 1912 when it set sail on its fatal voyage. We're going to leave the port behind. I don't think we need to be embarking on a cruise to the Caribbean or the cruise to the Mediterranean. We are going to be heading back up the street, taking a little bit more of Southampton, but so far I'm really trying to find things I like about this place, but it's a struggle so far. It really is a struggle. I'm sure there are things that are going to impress me, like the Tudor Museum. The Tudor House was very, very nice. And there's a pub over here. Let's have a look at this pub. Look at this. So we've moved slightly away from the ports. The port is still behind, so we're over here with the big ships, the big cruise ships and everything. But we moved into this park away from the 6 lanes of traffic to head towards a pub that I think will be perfect for a late lunch. It's called the Grapes. And I mentioned it earlier very briefly if you were paying attention, but the Grapes is a pub that workers of the Titanic were frequently drinking at before they set sail from the Titanic, and it is thought quite potentially it's the pub used in Cameron's Titanic movie where Jack wins in a poker game or a gambling game, and then he wins tickets to go on the Titanic. But the reason there's historical significance to this pub, it's the 3 workers who were supposed to be working in the furnaces decided they would have another one for the road, and in doing so that made them miss boarding the ship they were supposed to be working on, the ship they were supposed to be sailing on, and effectively saving their lives. So that's where we're going to go. We've got a monument over here to General Gordon, a significant war hero. He died, I think he died at the end of the 19th century, and he was celebrated. So right behind us is a memorial plaque to all those that perished in the Titanic, and then obviously a little bit further back is the Star Line Pier. And then we're going to walk to the pub just over here. So we're going to walk into this direction. This is probably the nicest bit of Southampton we've seen so far. So I'm already slightly impressed. This is called the Queen's Terrace. So let's go enjoy this part of Southampton. This is Latimer Street, a quiet road today, but once part of the bustling heart of Southampton's shipbuilding industry.
Here, sailors and dock workers would have passed through en route to the great liners that sailed from Southampton's docks. Then this is Oxford Street, now known for its lively restaurants and bars, but once the haunt of seafarers and traders fresh off the ships looking for a meal, a drink or something more. In the late 19th and 20th centuries, this was a rougher part of town, a place where fortunes were spent as quickly as they were earned. And then we come to the Grapes, a pub with a story far bigger than its size. I mentioned earlier the 3 crewmen. In fact, it was actually 6 crew members of the Titanic who were meant to be on board when it set sail, but after a heavy drinking session, they missed their departure, a twist of fate that likely saved their lives. Their names are still etched in Southampton's Titanic history, a reminder of how small choices can change everything. Well, that was Oxford Street in Southampton. Didn't end up eating at the Grapes, had a Vietnamese at the house or something. It was alright, Right behind me, a casino. So if you're a bit of a gambling addict, you can head to the casino. I think it's seen better days, you can play blackjack, slots, a bit of poker maybe. My expectations at this stage are fairly low. I'm trying, guys. So I walked away from the old town to the Ocean Village. Now, is it going to be like St Catherine's Dock in London? I'm starting to see. I don't know how they can call it a village when you have skyscrapers, but let's have a look. It feels like St Catherine's Dock because I see a white yacht over here. Let's go check this out. Ocean Village wasn't always a marina for the wealthy. This was once the beating heart of Southampton's docks, where ships were built, repaired and sent off to sea, a place of hard labour, industry and grit, where men worked long hours, not for luxury but to make a living. But as the industry declined and the shipping trade changed, the docks were redeveloped in the 1980s, the cranes came down and the warehouses vanished, and in their place rose luxury apartments, high-end restaurants, although sparsely distributed, and a private marina for the few who could afford it. Tony Blair would probably call this progress, a modernisation of Southampton's waterfront, bringing in investment and a touch of glamour. Others, they see it as yet another example of a city being sold off, transformed from a hub of industry into a gated playground for the elite, where those who built the city could never afford to live. And this isn't just a Southampton story, it's a UK story. A country where a gap between the rich and the poor is no longer just an economic issue, it's a visible divide. The yachts float peacefully in their moorings, while just streets away, families struggle to keep the heating on. And yet no one seems to care. The rats keep running their race, too consumed by survival, too distracted by the next bill, too blind to see where all this leads. A nation mismanaged for decades, spiraling towards an end no one wants to admit. I look at this marina and I just see Britain's two-tier society. Some sail effortlessly on the tide of wealth, while the rest are left struggling to stay afloat. Well, having checked out the Ocean Village and the docks and had a look at the 100 to £500,000 yachts and boats, and avoiding getting hit along the way, now I'm going to try and head up towards the older part of the city. It really isn't a place that encourages tourism, this place. It's a real mishmash. You don't really know where to go or what's going on. But we endeavour. Heading away from the river and the ocean, we're going to head up over across this bridge that was erected in 1880 towards hopefully something visually appealing, but at the moment, well, it's my view. As I attempt to walk into the centre where we might find something significant, I find this office block called Duke's Keep. It's actually for sale, should you be interested. And it looks, given the fact that this is the car park and underneath it there are no cars, and the building does look pretty much abandoned. It's probably one of the many victims of the COVID era. People now working from home, people not needing atrocious office blocks that were built in the 1970s. The hope is that it will get redeveloped, but redeveloped into what? Pod living for more, you know. Southampton is in a sorry state. The biggest activity I see in Southampton are delivery boys for Just Eat, Deliveroo, Uber Eats. It's the biggest activity I see. And as we walk past Central Hall, which I presume is
possibly the council officers, you have to wonder that these people go to work every day. You'd expect them to, although probably now they're working from home because they're too fragile to actually go into the offices. And they see the mess that is the disorganised road system of Southampton, these holes in the ground that should be prestigious development, but instead nothing. Empty office blocks, abandoned commercial units. Southampton really is an illustration of what has happened to the UK due to socialists, and when I say socialists, I include the Conservative Party in that. There's nothing right-wing about the Conservative Party. They don't value our heritage, they don't value what this nation used to be. Both New Labour and Conservatives have let down this nation, and Southampton is a prime example of what's happened here. Knocked down, but how long has it been knocked down for? ABS local, whatever this is. Look at this beautiful... An abandoned, possibly a pub. This used to be a pub in an old Tudor building, maybe. A tattoo shop. Hairdressers. At least some of these businesses are functioning. But it's hard to tell. And oh, this one definitely isn't. Debenhams, another victim of COVID. The Debenhams would have, I remember it closing in 2020, 2021. And it's still abandoned. And as you can see here, abandoned. Next restaurant abandoned. I mean, this has obviously been vacant for the last 3 years now, at minimum. And right next to it, we have the Pod Living, new build apartments, but where there should be commercial units underneath, nothing's really appeared. Because why would they? When your view is the abandoned Debenhams. It's just the sorriest state of affairs, isn't it? Gatehouse apartments, sold to them probably in the last few years, saying you too can live in the centre of Southampton, but why would you want to? And over here we got some more abandoned, or well, actually this is a new bit of construction, so things are happening around here, but to what end? To what end indeed? It's a worrying city. Look where we are. I just want to show you that we're in the centre. The old town, which is where we were, which is the old Tudor House, just there. Walked up the high street. You know what? We're going to walk down here slightly, do a square, and then we're going to come up here.
Once upon a time, Britain was a nation of entrepreneurs, risk-takers and self-starters. If you had a good idea and a drive to make it happen, you could build something for yourself, create jobs and contribute to the community. But look around now, empty streets, boarded up shops, businesses that never stood a chance. And why, the overseas viewers probably asking? Because the state has crushed the very spirit of entrepreneurship. Business rates dreamed up by idiots in local government punish small businesses before they've even had a chance to make a sale. Rents driven up by greedy landlords and property speculation have become so obscene that only chain stores and big corporations can survive. And if you somehow make it past those hurdles, the state isn't done with you. Crippling taxes, endless red tape and national insurance costs so high that profit becomes fantasy. We've gone from a can-do nation to can't afford to even try nation. A country where bureaucrats who've never run a business in their lives dictate the rules to those who actually create value. And the result? Streets like this, a wasteland of missed opportunities, broken dreams and shuttered shop fronts. The UK should be a country where ambition is rewarded, not punished. But instead of supporting the next generation of entrepreneurs, our government has decided that working for yourselves should be a struggle, not a success story. This isn't just Southampton's problem. It's a British-wide problem, and until we take the boot of bureaucracy off the throats of small businesses, these streets will remain exactly as they are, lost.
So literally reaching the top of the high street. So the high street stretches all the way down there to here, and I have to say it's one of the most bleakest high streets for a city that has a population of about 275,000. Since 1951, that population has grown by a good 75,000. The demographics have changed considerably in that time, and I think the soul of the city has changed considerably in that time, despite the fact that, I mean, it just feels, I mean, you could be anywhere here. I mean, like these, look at these bleak, they're obviously trying to renovate it, but this is right by the city walls, top of the city, of the old town. It's called the Bar Gate. We'll have a look in here. So this is the old bar gate, the city walls. You've just seen how the city walls are basically extended over there. You can see the edge of the city walls in that direction over there. But what town planner thinks this is a great idea? We're going to put Burger King next to these beautiful city walls. You just build all this atrocious development. It makes you wonder what they're thinking. And then when you walk up into the new part of the city called the Above Bar, we start seeing Townland, Pepco, although it has to be said the shops are a little bit more functional here. Let's see what we see. Maybe this is the main shopping district. Note the diversity barriers. Something that was in most cities up until the last sort of 15 years or so. These things started appearing. Do you feel safer? Wonder why they might need those barriers.
Protection from whom?
Some perspective on where we are. This is the other side of that shopping centre that we saw at the beginning of our journey. And that leads onto this really, really awful shopping street. Concrete. But then again, look at the tops of these buildings. What were the town planners thinking? Ah, yes, socialism was on their brains. Looking towards the Soviet Union from textbooks, thinking, oh, that would be a great idea.
You talk as if the socialists and anarchists were the same thing.
I have to move away from that shopping district. It was giving me a sort of real negative energy. We're going to head towards the park, walk up north through the parks, and then we're going to head into what is known as the cultural district. So hopefully we're going to saving the best for last. I mean, it can't be that difficult. But look, when you've got betting shops and banks and casinos, and how are you pushing yourself forward as a society? And I have to say, I'm not hearing many English voices around here. Everything from Romanians to Poles to Afrikaan. You wouldn't know where you are, other than the sort of, obviously you would because you've got the bleakness. But this looks nice, so we're gonna head into this park, get our positive energy back. I have to say, thank God for this park. The Palmerston Park just behind us there, and the East Park has set my mind on a better course. I think I was getting a little bit dejected at what had happened with Southampton, but the park is probably one of the better things to see in Southampton. It's actually a very beautiful park. We're going to head up towards the north side of the park and check out
the fountain. I think it's called the Peace Fountain. And then there's going to be a line of monuments. And over here apparently is the cultural quarter. So we've got a gallery in this direction, which we're going to come back onto, I think. I think that's the plan. So just to my right over here, behind these trees, is Solent University. There's the University of Southampton and Solent University in this town. But we're going to go see this. This is, honestly, thank God for these parks, because without these parks, I would be struggling to enjoy this place. So this is Richard Andrews. He used to be the mayor of Southampton back in the 19th century, probably when it was a powerhouse and beautiful place that it used to be as opposed to now. My guess is it hasn't had the greatest upkeep. You can see his face is worn away from the elements, mostly because the current mayor and the current councillors and the current administration don't really take care of the city in the way that probably this guy used to. Although I'll take that back when it comes to the groundskeepers of this park. This is actually a beautiful park. And we're going to head just over here, where there's some kids playing, to the Peace Memorial. The Peace Memorial. Notice the little kids splashing in it. Take it in. This monument, one of the most beautiful monuments I've seen in all of Southampton, is the monument to the engineers of the Titanic. This was actually unveiled in 1914. Titanic obviously sunk in 1912. 2 years later they unveiled a beautiful monument. Not pushed on by the propaganda of a Hollywood film. They thought we need to honour those men that sadly lost their lives in 1912 as they crossed the Atlantic, hit the iceberg, and they went down with the fateful ship. Right next to this park, as we cross over, we find the Southampton Cenotaph. This monument was unveiled in 1920, 2 years after the Great War, to remember the 1,913 individuals from Southampton who gave their lives, also known as the Glorious Dead, fallen people, and it's also now remembered for all the wars that have happened since and that continue to happen. Hopefully there will be very few more, but who knows the way this current world is going. But this is a beautiful monument that probably could do with a bit of a clean. Usually you would have poppies, candles around it. It's almost like with the football match on, there's one ring of poppies here, but 1,913 men are remembered here, and then obviously those that came after them. But a beautiful monument, and sadly only one ring of poppies. Jerusalem Bible's shriveled up here. Southampton win a game, a fairly significant game in fact. You can hear them all cheering. Standing actually right next to the University of Southampton. This actually is probably the highlight actually, this square. We wish I'd come here earlier. This is actually very beautiful. We're going to head down the street and then come back to this square. Talk to you more about that in a moment. Check out these football crowds over here.
these men put as much energy into the preservation of their city as they did into this insignificant game. For a lot of men, football is life. It's sad. We've lost lots of good men to that game. So if we were wondering who we might blame for the disorganisation that is Southampton, it would be these guys. This is Southampton City Council Hall. This is where all the grafting goes on. This is where the lack of attention to this once historical city went on. I guarantee the Romans, the Saxons, the Tudors had a better take on this city than the current council does. What are you going to do? What are you going to do though? But let's go and see the Guildhall, because the Guildhall is probably one of the most beautiful buildings in Southampton. We just got a sneak peek of it before. Let's go and have a look. It's a music venue, worthy of our time. We're not going to see any music, but let's just imagine that we were. It's worth having a look at. I think I like this because obviously it's Roman inspired, and in a way, remember the film Equilibrium? Christian Bale. This whole courtyard feels like you could have, not courtyard, square, feels like you could have proper authority.
All remaining systems will bow to the First Order!
But it's a music venue. Sadly, no music for us today. The Southampton people are happy because they've just won a football game. What do you guys think of this place? Leave a comment below. I'm curious to get your take on it. I have to say, maybe I found my new favourite statue in Southampton. This is Lord Mountbatten, Louis Mountbatten. He was born in 1900. He had a significant role to play in the Second World War. Helped basically bring the Allies to victory. Lived a very honourable career, and he is also the uncle of the Duke of Edinburgh, the Queen's husband basically. He was the uncle of the Queen's husband. And notice the way he stands. Do you remember the Duke of Edinburgh used to stand like that? You can see the family resemblance. Sad thing happened. He was on holiday in Ireland in 1979, and the treacherous IRA basically put a bomb on his boat, blowing him to smithereens, and he died in 1979. The nation mourned. Say what you like about the elites, but it doesn't strike me as a bad chap. Although comments down below if I clearly not been paying attention to any deviant life that he lived. I'm not aware of it, but maybe he did. I like this monument. This is a beautiful monument. So just come out of a pub, recharge the mobile. This is apparently where all the pubs are. It's in the north side of the city, and it's actually, thank God for this part of the city, because it's actually starting to look a bit normal. We're going to just sort of have a quick look around. Hopefully won't bump into too many football fans. Take it in. This is apparently the best craft beer place in the city. Should maybe come back when we've done the loop. Yeah? I think if you were visiting the city and all you saw was the south side or the central side of the city and you didn't come up towards the north, you'd be slightly concerned with the beer drinking culture that, well, it's all football orientated and generic pubs, but that was nice to see, and nice to see a proper craft beer place. And maybe this is another one, or is this a coffee shop? Let's have a look. It's a bottle shop. There we go.
This area of Southampton is known as Bedford Place. It's a small pocket of the city that still fights against a tide of bland chain stores and soulless developments and boarded up shops that we've pretty much seen throughout this video. This is, in my mind, is where you find character. There's a few independent bars here, buzzing pubs, and some proper craft beer spots, as I pointed out. These places actually have a bit of personality. Spots like Overdraft pouring some of the best craft beers in the city, Smugglers, a bar that feels like it belongs in a different era. It holds onto a past while still pulling in the crowds. Other bars to note, the Orange Room's a bar that's been there for decades, keeping the nightlife scene alive, while everything else around here gets torn down and turned into flats. Unlike the rest of Southampton, this area hasn't been completely sterilised. There's a sense of grit, a real mix of people, students, locals and old school drinkers, all rubbing shoulders. To me, it felt like it was one of the last places in the city that seemed to have that independent spirit still clinging onto it. But like everything else, Bedford Place probably is under threat. Rising rents, a socialist council meddling, and a creeping gentrification are putting a squeeze on all of these businesses. But for now, if you want a taste of something that feels uniquely Southampton, that has soul. This neighbourhood for me seemed to make the trip to Southampton worth it. If I was spending a weekend in Southampton, I would probably stay around here. Just the insights I got from the time I spent here.
I know that's the generic Irish bar there, but I have a little bit of hope for the city when I see this quarter that clearly has a little bit of vibrancy to where the rest of the city was clearly lacking. It turns out there's a lot of pubs in that direction as you head towards the... there we go, we got the guys... that is Southampton through and through. I was just outside the Alex pub. I'm not going to go in now. Not going to go in. And it's a city of mixed feelings. They're very mixed about this city. You know, who really wants to finish in the last pub where guys are basically sticking their bellies against the glass? A city that on the ups, a city on the down, a downward spiral trajectory unless something changes, in my opinion. But I'm going to get on the train in a couple of hours. I'm going to have a quick craft beer before I do. Not there, not at the Alex. Go back to that craft beer place over there. And that's it. That's Southampton. Anyway, I hope you've enjoyed this content. Until next time, I'll see you in the next video.